Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Nora Polovich, a manager of the North Peace Applied Research Association. We're located up in the Peace Country of Northern Alberta, and we do applied research and extension, and we do have a quarter section of land on which we do our research plots. Joining us this evening is Jay Fuhrer. So this is a second in our series of 3 webinars on gardening. And Jay is a longtime conservationist who grew up in the Dakotas on a small grain and livestock farm. And Jay has built his career taking care of our very important resource, the soil. Jay worked for the Natural Resources Conservation Service with the USDA for 40 years, and he has traveled the world sharing his passion and knowledge about soil health. So this evening, Jay is going to be discussing how we can apply those 5 soil health principles to gardening. So his presentation will be 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer period. You'll see on your screen, there is a Q&A spot, so please just type your questions in there. And we are going to start this evening with some questions that were emailed to me, Jay, if that's okay.
Yes.
The first question was, my garden soil is currently bare, so where do I jump into the cover crop cycle?
Okay, I think there's a couple options on this one, Nora, and I guess first of all, good evening, everyone. So welcome to the webinar. And we can take a look at these questions before we move into our second in the series. But I think when we're looking at introducing cover crops, and we have bare soils, which I'm a little shocked that anyone's garden would be bare. So that was just a joke. Okay, so that's what we want to change. And I think ultimately to take a look at that, I probably would proceed with my normal gardening rotation at this point. And with the thought that I can check out the cover crops now, and I can locate a little seed, and then we would be ready to do this as you harvest. And so as you harvest given areas in your garden, that's when I would start introducing them. And what we showed last week, one of the species that I used was cereal rye. That's a cool season grass, and it's fall planted. It's going to overwinter in our environment, and I believe it would overwinter in yours as well. Yeah. And the following spring, it would start up for you as well. So you'd have it in the fall, you'd have it again in the spring. And so I would start there. I would start with my normal crop rotation and locate some seed. I'd maybe start with a little cereal rye is a nice way to start. You can add species as you go. I think you always want to add some additional species, but I'd start there, and I would start applying that as soon as harvest. As soon as I harvest out an area of the garden, nice time to seed.
Okay. Yep. So she continues, do I plant my garden seeds like I would normally do, and after they are up, put the cover crop seeds, or do I just use straw or grass clippings between the rows until later on in the summer and then plant the cover crop, which I think you partially answered?
Yeah, with a first-time user, I think it'd give yourself a nice introduction into it by maybe adding some of the organic material between the rows, and then go ahead and plant the cover crops at harvest time. As you go along, I think you can get more creative, and you can start putting cover crops in between rows, and there's different things that you can do. We'll cover a little bit of that this evening when we talk diversity, but okay. For a nice intro, I think that would work really well.
Okay. And then how much cover crop seed do I need to cover a space by 40 feet by 40 feet, and where do I purchase these seeds?
Well, think of it this way. If you had a full acre, that's a big area, but if you had a full acre, then you'd be looking at maybe 60 pounds of rye, okay? And just doing the math on this, I think it was something like 4% of an acre, okay? Right. So you would only, if you had 5-10 pounds, you're in business.
You do good.
Or less. So you'd need a very small amount. And ideally, if you can locate some seed from, a farmer, or if there is a seed house that handles small packages, or if you can purchase one with others and split it up or something like that, because it definitely is not going to take you much seed.
That's right. Probably a Google search. You'll find lots of sources.
Hopefully.
Yes. And maybe you're going to cover this tonight or next week, but the next question was on slugs. We did have a severe slug infestation last year with our wet years. So this question was, last year my garden only survived the slugs because I sprayed regularly with a 1:5 ratio of ammonia and water. Am I going to see any negative after effects in my garden this year that I should work around?
Yeah, I'm going to try to cover slugs and some other things in this evening's session.
All right.
And I put part of the slug issue up front, and I put part of it in the end of the program.
Perfect.
Because I understand they are a challenge.
Exactly. Okay, thanks, Jay. We look forward to your presentation.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. We'll see how this goes here. Okay. Okay, Nora, you can let me know if
plant diversity and who likes who.
2 of 3.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good sign. Okay, well, good evening again. And this evening, we're going to talk a little bit about plant diversity and a little bit about who likes who, and see if we can kind of start to create our ecosystem. So last week, we set the stage when we talked about carbon. There were 4 types of carbon: the grain, the residue, the root mass, and then early on in the plant's life, gives off those liquid carbon sugar exudates into the soil to attract the biology. So we talked about those 4 parts of carbon. And then we talked about cover crops. And I mentioned earlier, a nice place to start with a garden is a cool season grass for a cover crop. The reason I say that is the vast majority of garden produce is not a cool season grass. So that's why it's kind of a nice place to start, because it gives you what you don't have. And with diversity, adds to your diversity. And then we talked a little bit about compost. And with the compost, we talked about applying compost, making compost, and applying compost. And then we also talked about extracting a liquid extract out of the vermicompost. And we also talked about that you can make a tea from this. That's all things we talked about last week. So now we want to go more into the plant scenario. We want to start to build our ecosystem, because I think every garden should be kind of its own ecosystem, its own predator-prey relationship, and its own diversity of plants. And so with that, I think gives us a chance to build our soils a bit, and then that nutrient improvement shows up in our produce, both in taste and shelf life, and hopefully our own health. So with that, again, we're looking at some of the books that we're looking at this evening. One of the big ones is going to be Carrots Love Tomatoes. So that's got a lot about who likes who in it. So this is a reference book that I've used this evening. Another one is Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden. And Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden is a story of, on the Missouri River bottom, of gardening by Mandans and Rickaraz, etc. And this is one of the few captured cropping systems of the Native North Americans. And I think it's got a lot of value from that viewpoint, because we have very few cropping systems that have been captured in North America. And so this is one of them. And it's well worth the read, because it goes in and explains it quite well. So who likes who and more? Things to avoid. So let's start with those. And again, this is a listing. And the reference again is Carrots Love Tomatoes. And I think a lot of you that are very well versed into gardening, and you've been gardening a lot longer than I have, you've gone through a lot of this type things to avoid. And we understand that not, yeah, they might do okay, but they don't really care for that shared environment. And so we can kind of use that to help plan out our rotations. And we start to understand that the rotation involves a number of different plant diversity, and we start to understand that some of these are friendlier to others than not. And so we start to understand that, and I think that's a good place to start with who likes who. These are some of the ones that we would avoid. And then if we go to the next screen, we look at ones that we can consider. And so some of these that I've done over time that have worked out fairly well, carrots and flax don't seem to have too much, they seem to get along quite well. Potatoes and watermelon, peas with just about anything. Peas are very interesting, and they're real ambassadors because they seem to get along with the vast majority of other plants. Okay, spinach and strawberry, I've never tried that. This one I have tried a little bit, onions with cabbage family. And so there's some opportunities there along with beets. So you start to find your way, and some of these you can do a bit of combination that improves your diversity. Now you're starting to build the ecosystem, okay? And so tomatoes is also kind of another interesting one, and something that I want to take a look at this year. My thought was maybe carrots and or onions with a little bit of tomato, maybe carrots and tomatoes. So I'm starting to slowly build that, and what mine's going to look like this year. Let's see, I'm going to go to this one and then we'll go back. What mine's going to look like this year is I'm going to put my carrots and my flax together. Okay, so the flax is going to be just a cover crop, but this is going to improve, I think, the carrots. And then the potatoes and the watermelons, okay, lettuce and radish, onions and beets. So there's another two more I'm putting together. Tomatoes and carrots, like I mentioned earlier. The sweet corn with pole beans and squash, various squashes. And then a milpa, I'm going to cover that. That's the Mesoamerican method of planting combinations together and multiple species together. And then, of course, the three sisters, which we normally see that as sweet corn, pole beans, and squash. Okay. And so some of the pests, I wanted to kind of set a little bit of a stage there as well. And I'm going to go into the whole scenario in terms of predator-prey. I've got a number of different predators in the garden. And I have typically have some garden snakes or water snakes. Frogs, toads aren't so uncommon. I have a few chickens that typically will go on parole early in the morning, and they will just walk the perimeters, checking for anything that appeals to them. So I have a number of different predators, and they're all helpful. Rabbits and fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is supposed to be something to repel rabbits. I haven't used that myself. Cabbage, butterflies, and oregano, sage, and thyme. I have used that one, and this one has worked out fairly well for me. So this is one that I've used. There's a whole list of items here for slugs, and these are kind of things that are commercially available. And then when I get to the end of more toward the end of this PowerPoint, I want to talk about slugs again from the viewpoint of predators. And so you take a look at this. I have not used these products: wormwood extract, composted oak leaves, diatomaceous earth, beer, honey, salt, tobacco stem meal. These are all items that the websites, if you will, list, or items that Carrots Love Tomatoes list. And so I think a lot of you that have been fighting this slug war are probably well aware of these. But the question I think we really want to ask in regards to any of the pests is why are they there? And so we start, because keep in mind, one of our goals here is we want to build this ecosystem. And so we're going to address slugs again this evening, but it's going to be a little later toward the end of the program. I want to do a little better job of going into slugs. Anybody can list these products up here, and most likely you all know these products and others, okay? But let's go, we're going to talk about it more from the ecosystem that we're building when we get more toward the end of the program, okay? Okay, we talked about the 21 planting intentions at the Minokan farm, okay? So let's start with milpa. And now keep in mind, we're talking diversity this evening, and who likes who. We already have some basis now for who likes who. So let's start with milpa. And this is the milpa part of my garden from last year. This is 15 feet wide, 300 feet long, okay? And milpa you can purchase from this website right here, greencoverseeds.com. And they will supply you with various types of milpa that are geared towards summer, spring, and there's different combinations and mixes. So this one's got, I believe, a little over 40 species in it. And so from my spade right here to the right, I put a bioinoculant on. And from my spade here to the left, I did not have the bioinoculant. The bioinoculant I put on, I got from Overton Environmental out of Winnipeg. And so they mailed it to me, and I applied it onto the seed. It's a dry product. I just applied it right onto the seed and had no issues with it. But this is milpa, and may or may not be for you. This is a pretty large area. I plan to use it again this coming year, but a smaller area. This was 15 feet wide. If I did it over again, I'd want something a little narrower because of harvest. If you can harvest from the perimeters, if I had something about half of this wide, I think I would have liked it better, simply because I wouldn't have to walk over so much material. And so this particular mix you're looking at was primarily a summer type harvest, a late summer harvest, a lot of squashes and a lot of melons in it. So this was some of the harvest from the milpa. There was more, but kind of gives you an idea. Lots of different types of squash, lots of melons. And so there was a lot of summer produce coming out of it. Three sisters, I've grown them together a number of times. I usually put the corn and the pole bean together in the same hole. And then I plant the squash intermittently throughout. And here I used a biodegradable fabric. I had some weed pressure that I wanted to deal with. But the advantage of this is, if you look at it from a soils viewpoint, the phosphorus, if we look at this connection occurring underground, the plants, the phosphorus comes from that non-legume plant to the legume plant, and the nitrogen goes the other way, goes from the legume plant to the non-legume plant. And so we get this exchange, and we got to have mycorrhizal again. So that's the mycorrhizal fungi. That's the group in the soil that makes these type exchanges happen. So if we don't have the mycorrhizal fungi, it's very difficult, because these plants are giving off these liquid carbon exudates, like we talked about, that attracts the mycorrhizal next to the root mass, and we get these exchanges. So that's the advantage of planting something like the Three Sisters. They feed each other, okay? I don't fertilize these. And so we got the pole beans and the corn. The pole beans just climb right up the corn. And the squashes, I'll put a squash periodically because they branch so tremendously. And so just periodically I put a squash, and then toward the end of the summer, it looks like this. And so you get this ecosystem. And this ecosystem is your garden. And so there's three crops growing in there, so you get a lot of diversity. And it's the diversity that I'm looking for. And so this is just one way of doing it. Milpa is just one way. Three Sisters is just one way to look at diversity. Potatoes, this is spring potato planting at the Minokan farm. And so we usually cut them a few days in advance and then let them harden over a little bit. And then we just lay them on top of the soil. And so you can see there's a little cover crop coming up here. This is April. And then the potatoes, we usually just grow 3 rows. They're 300 feet long and just 3 rows wide. And then we'll either use straw or alfalfa. And the first attempt here, I used straw, but I didn't like that as well because of our windy environment. And then from then on, I used alfalfa. So now we just take an alfalfa bale, big round bale, and we unroll it over the potatoes. And then the most difficult part of growing potatoes like this is walking away. You have to walk away and just leave it alone. And so it probably put about 8 to 10 inches of mulch on it. And you can see how they came up. So there's 3 rows in here, okay? And it was 300 feet long. And then as you get more toward, this was mid-July, you can actually start to rob some potatoes from underneath the mulch if you choose to. And so sometimes it's nice to secure a few off there, let the plant grow, and maybe produce a few more. So it allows that to happen. But a potato will elongate plenty far enough to make that 8 to 10 inches of mulch work out. And so it does a really good job of reducing evaporation. Virtually everything is transpiration through the plant. And the other thing I really liked about it is it had very little disease issues. Colorado potato beetles have been almost non-existent. They don't seem to like this type environment. And it produces a nice harvest. And so we start to harvest potatoes. We use the food pantries in Bismarck, Mandan. There's about 12 food pantries, and so we supply produce to most of them periodically as we have it available. So broccoli and cauliflower are 2 more that we can put in combination, and I like to add some thyme and rosemary. And I don't actually use a pesticide on the garden, and so I will sometimes use a hood like this. And these hoods allow air exchange and that type of thing. And you can see we got the herbs down in here, and we got the broccoli and the cauliflower, and then you get the aroma from the thyme and rosemary. And insects don't seem to appreciate that too much. And so we've had good success with that. That's worked out okay. Plus, I have 4 different plants growing instead of 1. And so that really helps our diversity. And you can also harvest the herbs as well. So cereal rye and peppers. Sometimes I let the rye grow. I don't smother it. Okay, like this one, I just let the rye grow. And I transplanted peppers into it. Okay, now I've had to increase the water because the rye was still growing. Eventually, the peppers overcome the rye, and the rye matures and slowly falls down, okay? And so this was one way that I didn't even put a cover over the rye and smother it. I just let the rye grow. The peppers didn't seem to mind too much, but it did take more water. So if you have an issue with supplying adequate amount of water, it's maybe not your system, but it worked out pretty well for me. I kind of liked growing the peppers that way. So the rye is a cool season grass, and the peppers is a warm season broadleaf. So these 2 get along well. And agronomically, they help in terms of disease management because they are opposites in terms of crop types. So a little more on diversity. These are the crops I grew in the high tunnel last year. So just a little listing of them so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. Was my first year with flowers. So we're going to talk about flowers next week. And we're also going to talk about the herbs next week. So that will save that part. But you can see I have some of them right here in this particular bed. And you can see which ones, okay? But they're all part of diversity again, okay? So sweet potatoes is another, I think, pretty good crop for us. In a high tunnel, we get plenty of heat, and they are very, very warm season. They like it hot. If you mention frost, they'll probably die. But the advantage of them is you can harvest the top growth for salads. Okay, so your sweet potato leaves are very edible, and they do make a good salad. Now, you can't do this with regular potatoes. That's a different family. But a sweet potato plant, you can go ahead and harvest the leaves, make salad out of it, and then later you harvest out the tubers. Okay, and you can do what my wife Kathy does. We like to make chips out of them, so we slice them and bake them, and you know, it becomes part of your nutrition. But the sweet potatoes, you can take a shear and cut back these branches. It's not a problem. The plant doesn't really object to that. I usually let them grow quite a bit, but if you run out of room, you just come in and shear them back, give them a haircut, and then they'll be pretty well behaved for a little while until they grow out again. I don't cut the whole box down. I just cut the edges here that are hanging over. But again, the leaves make a good salad. Beets definitely play a nice role. This past year, I grew them as a monoculture. This coming year, I want to take a look at a combination. But I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons I grow beets is I love their leaves. I think they're one of the most beautiful leaves in the garden. And so they play a really nice role. And it's nice to have that plant diversity and color. So you get the red vein with the green leaf. They're very attractive that way. So then too, the bush beans, whether they're yellow or whether they're green, they're both excellent. And I did have a leaf disease in one of the beds last year. And I treated that with some liquid extract out of the vermicompost beds, and it came out of that quite nicely. So they sometimes like to be babied a little bit, but you can see on here there's a lot of blossoms. And so when I add an extract to them at seeding time, you know, that's when I treat the seed with the liquid vermicompost extract and put a little bit of juice on them. Usually I see a lot of nodulation, a lot of blossoms occur from that as well. So it's a nice addition to the garden from a diversity viewpoint. Again, it's a legume, so it's really nice in your rotation. Peppers, just a couple comments on them. There's so many things that you can do with them in so many different colors, so many different degrees of how hot they are. So they're kind of fun that way. Again, I showed you some earlier. I grew right in the standing rye, which you can do if you want to, but be prepared to add additional water. Otherwise, it's a warm season broadleaf. Makes a nice addition, nice color. Okay. So these are all different beds that we just kind of talked about. And then if you look right here, you can see on the cucumbers, you can see the little fence cribbing I put up on each side. Okay. And so that fence cribbing then becomes their trellis, and they can hang on that. So I do that on tomatoes. You can see some more right here, a little cribbing on the side for trellis. I do that on the cucumbers, and I also have a bed or two that has milkweed in it. And so I always let some milkweed plants grow in there. I want them to grow in there. And then, you know, that's what we start looking for. Usually get some monarch butterflies later in the year as they come up from Mexico or California. Usually the monarchs take probably 2 or 3 life cycles to get this far north. And but when they return at the end of the year, they get up on the jet stream and they can return quite quickly. But as they're going north, it's probably going to take about 3 generations to get to Bismarck. So then another one that I grow on occasion is okra. And this was my first year at growing okra. and it got a lot larger than I was anticipating. And so you can see this is the south side here, and I got the okra plants in here. And then on the north side, I've got some herbs, and of course the okra just took over, and all the sunlight and everything else. And so it went all the way to the ceiling, and I think the ceiling is about 11 feet. So they did go all the way to the ceiling. They get to be a huge plant. So it's kind of thought of as kind of a southern food in the U.S., but we can definitely grow it and grow it well in a high tunnel because we can get enough heat. Carrots are another, item that I like to bring into play. I like the clay coating, the ones with clay coating, because I can see those. And so as you're planting them, the carrots are so small and there's not much energy in that seed. But if they have clay coating on them, they're much easier to space. Okay. And they just work so well in so many different dishes. So all of these are dishes that Kathy and I try to prepare, whether it's for a guest or for our own meals. But they're all part of our nutrition, and this diversity of nutrition is so important. So again, this is a little closer look at the okra. It gets a really pretty flower, and then the okra fruit right here. You can fry it, as we like to say here. If you fry it in bacon grease, it probably doesn't really matter what it is. You're probably going to eat it. But this is one that works out pretty well for that. You got to be really timely with the harvest, because once these pods are on here, even if you miss a day or two, it's amazing how fast they get large and a bit rank. So, and then along with the lettuce, different types of lettuce. And so there's always opportunity to commingle 2-3 different species there, which I think is very good as well. And then more recently, we're adding fruit trees to the high tunnel. And there's plenty of room to add some. I'll explain this. This is an apple tree. And so we put the apple tree in last year. Espalier is the technique, and a lot of you have done this. Basically, it means trained to grow flat along a wall. And it was an old Roman concept that they brought to Europe when they basically occupied Europe for a long period of time. So this is 1 year's growth on the apple tree. And then in March, not that long ago, we pruned it back. And so here's a branch. Here's a branch. Here's the top of the tree right here. That's as tall as it's going to get. And then we left these two here, and then we'll put a brace board behind this one and a brace board behind this one. So then the sides of your high tunnel or the sides of your garden, whatever is convenient, gives you an opportunity, if you have limited space, to still bring in an apple tree. And then this year we're adding peach. So we're going to add a peach tree. Last year we added the apple tree. This year we're going to add a peach tree, probably a cherry tree. I think we have enough room for at least 3 trees on each side of the high tunnel. That gives the horizontal branching a long way to go. And so there's a little pruning and training with this, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. We need to secure these horizontal branches so that they can do a little bit of growth and have some fruit hanging on them. So I think that's an option for diversity as well. So let's talk a little bit about a summary and get some feel for this, because what we're really doing here is we're building an ecosystem. Okay, and so this is the Minokan farm, and I've got these flowering shrubs that are right alongside the garden, and there's probably about 6-7 different species. And I'm walking along here early one morning, and this guy was sunning himself, and he had crawled vertical quite a ways and got up into the sunshine. And when I came by, it didn't move, and I kept getting a little closer and a little closer, and finally he reluctantly moved, but he was in that sunshine. And so when I have predators like this, and I mentioned toads and frogs and snakes, and when I have these type predators, a lot of my other issues go away. I'm going to give you an example. Field mice, not much for field mice. And so, you know, when we have some of these guys, they do a lot of work for us. But in order to have them, we have to have food and home. And so I'm supplying the home with the ecosystem of the plant diversity, okay? And so as you add this, you start looking at the whole scenario. And as you pick up a disease or an insect, and then you ask yourself, well, why? Well, then we take a look at, do we have this functioning ecosystem? Do we have some habitat that allows these things to be there? So I thought, let's look at that, you know, a little bit further, okay? I know not everybody likes a little water snake, but he's part of the ecosystem. It's not a pet for me either, but I recognize its value, and it has a lot of value. And so I have to be a little careful with chickens, because if I have chickens out there, they have no mercy for anything. They clean out everything. And so the chickens are very effective, but I don't have much for a frog or a toad or a snake after the chickens are done. So I gotta kind of temper them, and I might use them on occasion. So I'm going to see if this works, Nora. I just want to try this. If not, I'll just come back to it and we'll just talk about it. But let's try this. And you tell me if this doesn't show up. So Nora, can you see that?
No, your first slide is up, Jay, but not the
Okay.
video.
Okay. All right. I might not be able to make that work. So, okay, I'm going to go back
Okay.
to where I was, I hope. Give me a moment. Okay, am I back on my slide, Nora?
Slughelp.com. Yep.
Okay, okay. So I'm not going to be able to run those, but that's okay. We don't need to. Slughelp.com I found as one of the better sources for slugs, because really what's happening here is you're educating me about slugs. I've had very little issue with them. But I went on their site and they've got a ton of these little short 2-minute videos here. This one's a fatty toad eating a slug, frog eating a slug, snake eating a slug, ground beetle. This is, if you hate slugs, you got to watch the ground beetle eating a slug, because it's painful for the slug. And so it depends on how much you dislike these slugs. But my point is this, they also have chickens eating slugs, and they have a number of different predators that can do this. But now, in order to make that work, that takes some of these habitat types here. So the first one is, you know, bare soil. Bare soil is not going to work in trying to build an ecosystem. We either need to have some residue on the surface, hopefully some residue, and or a cover or a dead cover, something like that that would cover our soils. Okay, that's a starting point. Native plants. Whatever you have, that native grasses, for example, would be wonderful to have part of that in your garden. Part of your garden could be native plants, and then that's a safe haven for a lot of these particular items we're talking about. The toads, you know, you can have little covers that they would be under, that they can hop under, a broken flower pots turned upside down, that type of thing. Also water, little ponds, then you start to build that habitat. But anything that you can do for native plants, whether it's native shrubs or native grass plants, those would be a wonderful addition somewheres in your garden. And then brush piles. Anytime that you do prunings, etc., if you can put that into a bit of a brush pile, that becomes an area to foster life. and dead wood. At the Minokan farm, I take an electric drill. I got a block of wood on a wood fence post, and I drill various size holes in there. And then different pollinators come in and put their eggs in there, and they put in usually some soil in there, pack that in as well, and they create a little incubator in there, but they lay their eggs in there. And so that's a wonderful thing from the pollinator viewpoint. And then rock cairns, think of that as just rock piles, okay? And think heat, because if you're looking for some help from a frog or help from a toad, it wants to be warm. And so these rock cairns, they absorb heat, and it gives them a place to be and a place to be under or have some protection, but also have a little warmth. Then probably one of the bigger items is ponds. If you have ponds, then I think all of a sudden things like toads and frogs get a little bit easier. And you know, I think back a lot of toads and frogs. We used to have a lot of them when I was a kid. We don't see them so much anymore, and I think we've taken away a lot of their habitat. And sometimes when I'm walking out in a farm, I'm in the cropland or the hayland or the rangeland, we just don't see that many of them, but we used to see a lot of them. And they played such a big role, especially as a predator, I think, for slugs in general. A little area of sand, that's insects laying eggs. So a little area of sand is always helpful. If you got borders, you could also take a look at some rock borders. Or you can have a raised soil border, raise it up about a foot, plant some native grass on it, and then that becomes a great area for beetles, etc., to lay eggs, and you start to create this ecosystem. And then I think another item is consider your pets. Cats and dogs they're wonderful pets, but if you're trying to have having to have frogs eating in your garden and cleaning up slugs, a cat or a dog might want to play it to death. It's just a difficult environment that way. So you got to kind of consider your pets, and some pets don't pay any attention to anything like that, and then others do, so but just consider it. So what we're talking about then is this environment. And so we've talked about the soil organic matter and soils themselves, building soil aggregates, so it improves our infiltration, etc. And then we talked about compost. We talked about adding plant diversity. And as you picked up by now, we are building this ecosystem. And so as we build this ecosystem, can we bring in more predators that have this predator-prey relationship that goes on, and a lot of times we don't even realize it. There was another one, I think I mentioned it to you. The individual had a chicken or two, and it was amazing how many slugs a chicken can eat. And so you start looking at that, and you start, I think those are good options. Also, anything in the firefly family is a predator to a slug. And again, when I was a kid, fireflies weren't so uncommon for us. I haven't seen a firefly in a long, long time. And so anything in the firefly family, the glowworms, the larvae stage, etc., would work on a slug. And then there was another one beside the chicken. There was, I think it was a blackbird eating slugs. And so, there's a lot of predator choices here, but we need this ecosystem. And part of it is with the plant diversity. When you bring in the plant diversity and our soils improve and we have them covered, okay, I think some of this is going to go away for you, because you look at the whole slug situation, and to me, that's a symptom. So slugs, like a lot of these scenarios, are symptoms. And then if we look at what is the problem is very likely more of the ecosystem or lack thereof of habitat and food that fosters this additional life. So it kind of gives us an idea of, where we're at on that and how that scenario plays out. Now, I know from several of you and emails, etc., that the slug issue was very apparent last year, obviously. And when you're in the middle of that, there's not so many choices, okay, because you're in the middle of it. It's kind of like a drought. When you're in a drought, there's not so much you can do about it. All of that needs to be done before. And so as you go and take a look at this long term, moving into it, then I would look at the diversity of these plants. And I would start to look at my native plants. I think Nora would be a good, likely a very good resource of what plants are native, maybe even possible sources for them. And so we start to slowly build this in our garden. And then, I think from that, we start to get this ecosystem where we are fostering life, okay? So fostering life, I think, should be our first thought. And how do we provide food and a home? And a pesticide can't do this. And I've told many of you that have been on any of my seminars in the past, the first half of my career, I pretty much killed everything. And the second half, and that I can tell you from experience that that's not the long-term answer. So the second half of my career, I'm trying to foster life. And the big impacts that I see is when we bring an ecosystem, we get it functioning, we get some plants and we get some habitat. And that's when these things occur. So you're building this garden ecosystem. And so I'm just stepping into Mrs. Spear's kitchen here. And she takes all these pictures of food, and as she prepares them and then shares them with her children, etc. And so this is, I want to use some analogies here. So this is what we call Veg Medley. That's our name for it. And this particular pan here has got a lot of different plants in it here that are nutritious for you. Okay, and then there's other options down here that you can put on there as well. So you see, there's a lot to the diversity. Just like, I want to use some comparisons here, just like when you're planting a cover crop, you can have a lot of different species in the cover crop. And just like the forest and the native rangelands, before they became cropland, they had a lot of diversity of the species as well. And so really what we're doing is building those back. And you can see it from the pan on the kitchen, all the way back to the garden, and we start to reconstruct of what was there. So with that, I just kind of wanted to bring that to a close here for this evening. And I included the book list again too. There's lots of good books on here. Ones I wanted to point out was Life in the Soil by James Nardi. That's a really good, I think has a lot of good information about everything that's alive in the soil. And then Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden, right here, great read. And it helps us understand how this process used to occur over thousands and thousands of years of producing food. Okay, so lots of good reads here, but those are some that I wanted to point out. So Nora, with that, I think I've left some time, and
Okay.
I'm happy to take a question or two or whatever you feel is appropriate.
Yes, there has been a few questions. I do have to ask, where's the garlic, Jay?
I have garlic planted in the Minokan farm last fall. I'm still waiting for it to arrive and break the soil surface this spring, which hasn't happened yet. So
Okay.
I don't know if I have success. If it's a failure, it's not my first failure.
Okay, all right.
But I like it too.
Yes, okay, good. All right, one of our first questions is, we don't usually have enough heat to plant sweet potatoes here. Do you grow them under straw?
I have not, but I am going to be trying that. I have not grown them under straw. I've grown them in the high tunnel, and the high tunnel has plenty of heat for sweet
Right.
potatoes.
Okay.
I know a few people that have tackled them outside here, and have had some success with that as well. But I haven't grown them under a mulch, and I think that's definitely something I'd like to try.
Okay.
Good question. Way to challenge.
What is the name of the beets in your photo?
Good question also. The name started with red something. Red.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have it off the tip of my tongue.
Okay.
Wish I did, but I don't.
How do you prune and grow / keep vertical your indeterminate tomatoes?
I've used I've used determinate and indeterminate both over the years, and I've used the panels, if you will. They're like livestock panels, and I cut them to fit in length. And then I put at a slant, I put 2 steel posts in on each side. So I have 4 posts, and then I put the panels, they lay against the posts, and I secure them. And so basically, and I have the tomatoes fairly close together. So basically they can't flop left or right. They can,
Right.
they're forced to stand there. And sometimes the pruning, etc., or the harvest can get a little bit tight, but that's what I've done with them. I usually grow 1 panel of tomatoes.
Okay. I just found
tomatoes.
Go ahead.
One more thing, Nora. Sorry.
Yes.
Tomatoes, I think, have been a real challenge in our grocery stores. And here anyway, I think I can safely say this, not trying to trash the grocery store, but they don't have the greatest taste. I think at one time they were better. And if some of that might be like an early harvest before nutrient storage is done inside the cell walls. I mean, there can be a combination of things.
Right.
But one of the things that one of my daughters called me and said, "Dad, I cut open this tomato at home and there's green leaves inside the tomatoes, inside this tomato." And I said, "Well, I would throw it against a brick wall. If it bounces back to you, don't eat it." And sometimes you'll see some things like that. So tomatoes, and they should be just delicious.
Right.
And so I think tomatoes is a good challenge, and I try to find some of the older heirloom varieties and kind of work at it from that angle.
Okay. I just found out that peppers can be carried over here for a second year if you have a good plant. You can cut it down and repot it indoors.
I did not know that.
There you go.
Yeah. Celery, of course, is like that, and carrots, another biennial. Right. But I wasn't aware of that on peppers. That's good to know. Thank you for that.
Can bush beans be used in place of pole with the corn and squash?
I think you could. They're not going to hang on the corn plant like a pole bean will. The pole bean's going to wrap around it, and it's got all kinds of attachments on it. I think you could. It'll supply the nitrogen. The phosphorus nitrogen exchange will happen also with them. It's just that they aren't going to grow as tall probably vertically. But they do go up a ways, so I would give them a try. Yeah.
Okay.
I would. Some people don't like the taste of pole beans as well. And so
Okay.
I mean I don't mind them, but I might have a preference to the bush bean.
Right. For the raised beds, what is the composition of it? Is it a mixture of soil and compost?
Okay. Would this be the raised bed that I was referring to on one of the last slides for a habitat type, or would this be in the high tunnel?
In the high tunnel.
Okay, in the high tunnel. I've used what I guess I would call about 2/3 soil, 1/3 compost. It's pretty close. Okay. And my goal is to just rebuild, recycle. And if you don't do that with a cover crop, you can burn through a soil in a high tunnel really quickly because it's very hot.
Right.
And it's very moist. And so you're going to go through a lot of soil aggregates and a lot of carbon, and it's a very difficult environment. And then you're going to be switching out or adding a whole lot of compost. I like to look at it as something I can recycle. So with cover crops and the plant diversity, I can recycle and rebuild that soil over and over again.
Okay. I am growing gladiolas with peas and beans. Do you think they will like each other?
Good question. I've never done that, but I would be very interested in knowing how that played out. I don't know if the photo is available or something that you could email me. I haven't done that, so this is my learning opportunity from you. So appreciate that question. Sorry I can't answer it, but I always tell people that usually when I start a webinar, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to say something very creative like I don't know. But collectively, there's so much experience on this webinar that appreciate some of those type of things coming out. So thank you for that.
What type of material do you use to contain the raised beds, and how high are they generally?
Okay, I've got two different raised beds. I got some that it's a small raised bed. It's just 1 foot high, right on the ground. It's 1 foot high, and they were made with 2 by 12s. So there's nothing too fancy about them. And then on the other side, I have the raised beds, and they're I suppose they're 3.5 feet tall, right in there. So even 3.5 to 4, you can just stand very comfortably and work with it. And the older I get, the more I like the raised beds. And so those are made out of just old bridging plank that we had. We just used stuff that we had, and they've worked out well. We've had them a few years now. I've also used old cattle bunks, discarded out of corrals and feedlots, and I started with those.
Yep.
And I had 4 of them in there in the high tunnel, and that was my raised beds. And then as they gave out, we started building, if you want to say proper ones. But yeah, I like to have a good 2.5 feet of depth on them. I like a little depth on them because we're going to go ahead and get some pretty good plant growth on them.
Okay. One suggestion is we use old deep freezes for raised beds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think there's so many different things that you can do that with. I know people that have used tires, and they go ahead and stack them.
Right.
And if you recall, this is a few years ago, there was a lady that planted potatoes in them, and as they elongated, she kept adding more mulch and kept them elongating, and got them a few tires high, and they grew a lot of potatoes.
Right.
Yeah, it's ingenious.
Yeah, there's lots of ideas. Somebody else suggested old metal water troughs will definitely work too.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to do that, and we work with a budget just like anyone else, and so we're always looking for something that we maybe don't have to write a check for, and makes good environmental sense. Yeah.
Going back to where you were showing how you planted the potatoes, did the rye not grow because it was covered with that deep mulch of hay or straw?
Yeah, if we get enough mulch on there, that took care of the rye, and then alongside it, we just mowed.
Okay.
So that took care of it. Now, also, when you plant those potatoes, throw in some peas.
Okay.
So when you're done putting the potatoes out there, you might want to walk along it and throw some peas in there, because the pea will elongate a long ways. And then put that 8 to 10 inches of cover on it and walk away.
Okay.
I really prefer the alfalfa because it has a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio, so it decomposes down around the potatoes better.
Right.
And it has more nutrient in it, and alfalfa has growth hormones in it. So there's a whole multitude of reasons to use a little alfalfa.
Okay. I'm working on a plan for a hunger-free garden with master gardeners in a plot with such hard soil, the carrots were impossible to pull by hand last year. What would you suggest to amend the rows for this year?
Yeah, well, usually when we have something that's extremely hard like that, most all of our soils, and this is worldwide, in our cropland, in our hayland, in our gardens, it's carbon deficient. And they're looking for organic materials that would be decomposed, laying on top of the soil or in the soil, both, because that's the food. And
Right.
so as you bring the carbon, anything that can decompose will start to improve this. Now, if you have a soil test and you are low in your pH is low, for instance, okay, there's a number of things that can be out of balance that from a chemistry viewpoint might be helpful, but the best place to start is with compost and anything that can decompose. That's what that soil is starved for. And then what happens, because it doesn't have food, the biology can't build the little pore spaces anymore. That's what the biology does when you feed them. They build the pore spaces in the soil. And so when those pore spaces compress, it gets hard as a rock. I mean, you can't get a hoe in it or a spade in it, it gets hard as a rock. That's when you've taken all the food, you got to ask yourself why. But if you've taken all the food, you got bare soils, there's nothing decomposing in them, there's no carbon, they're going to get. So bring, I'd start with compost and get some litter on it. I'd put an inch or two of compost on top of it, and then maybe put a little dead litter on top of that shit, because that will allow you to hydrate it. Because until you get cover on your soil, you can't hydrate it. And if you can't hydrate it, it just stays in this state. But it's looking for food.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think of thyme as a cover crop?
Oh, I think almost any crop, almost any plant can be a cover crop. I wouldn't rule out any of them. And I grow a little thyme. I don't know a lot about it. I've got like 2 years into herbs. It's such a big topic, and there's so many of them. And I've really grown to appreciate them because of how they look, how they smell, what they do, how they taste. I mean, there's just a multitude of things. But yeah, why not?
Great. Awesome.
A green plant. Remember, you want a green plant because it's going to harvest CO2 and sunlight, and it's going to put these liquid carbon exudates in the soil. So green plant fixes a lot of things on the soil.
Right. Now, there's just a few comments. According to the Farmer's Almanac, the prairie provinces will be having hot, rainy weather this summer after a dry spring. Protecting the moisture in our soil with cover becomes important when it is dry or rainy to prevent erosion and soggy soil. Agreed.
Yep.
Another comment was, for slugs, I discovered tongs to pick them up and squish by stepping on them in the garden on a flat rock. That worked too.
There's a real dislike for slugs. I'm picking that up. I'm picking that up. But I've been blessed with some predators. I've got predators, and all of my predators, they all eat slugs.
Yeah.
And these sites, if you look at this webinar later and you see the sites that are on there, or if you just go to slughelp.com, take a look at the whole predator list on there and then what they like. And I get it that you're not going to create that in one day, but the fun of it is kind of building.
Yeah. But the idea of putting some laying hens out there really intrigues me. Then you get some eggs for. Also.
Yeah, I think, chickens play a role. And 2 years ago, I used chickens quite a bit, and they had a system. They got up early in the morning and they would walk alongside the potatoes as a group, clucking away. They'd go down along these potatoes, and if they saw anything, they'd pick it up, and then they'd come back on the other side, and they would be more in the milpa. So they'd be walking along the milpa and again doing the same thing. But they came across this half-grown gopher, and I've never really felt that sorry for a gopher before, but they just demolished that gopher so fast they didn't know what happened to him. They threw him in the air and they just all descended on him. Yeah. And that was the end of the gopher. But so mice, they clean out mice, and they clean out a lot of insects and slugs as well.
Right.
One hen could eat a lot of slugs.
And I think this year we could have grasshoppers. It seems we have a species that takes 2 years for their life cycle, so that could be an issue this year. So again, the chickens would come in handy. And
anytime you cover soil, grasshoppers don't like that, because they don't like a cool, hydrated soil. They want hot and dry. They want hot and dry soils. Right. And so that could pretty much disfavor them quite a bit.
Okay. A couple more comments was about the soil. It was so hard that the carrots couldn't be pulled out. Also, a little sand can help loosen up the soil if you've already tried everything else. Another comment on slugs. I used to stand outside with the needle nose pliers, pick off the slugs, and let them swim in a can of beer. So there you go.
Well, that isn't what I would do with the beer, but
No,
that's
me
okay.
neither.
That's okay. Each to their own. But
Yep.
you know, they're keep in mind they're a symptom, and you
Right.
need to unravel. The first half of my career, I built a lot of terraces, waterways, diversions, etc., on cropland.
Right.
We had such severe erosion rates, and truthfully, they were all symptoms. And the symptom was we had such degraded soils we couldn't get, when it rained, so much of it ran off.
Right.
Okay? And so it wasn't until we got out of the construction business and got into the soil restoration business that it really changed. And then as we brought the carbon in and the cover, we had to hydrate our soils. We had to cover them and hydrate them. And you can't get them hydrated until you cover them. So once you get some cover on, and then you got organic material to decompose, and you start to get the food in the soil, and then the life comes.
Exactly.
That's exciting. That's why we do this. It's exciting and it feels right.
Yes. Well, I don't think there are any more questions, Jay.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
I'll just let everybody know that the link for the first webinar has been sent out. The link for this webinar, it'll take us a few days, but it'll be up on our website, and everybody's registered for this will get the link sent to them.
Sure.
Oh, question about, oh, it says, so keep the chickweed as a question.
To keep it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess it's good ground cover.
Yeah. Well, the thing about a weed is, you know, a weed is reacting to an imbalance in the soil. The weed wants to heal you. And if you walked away from it, walked away from your garden and it had weeds, and you came back 10 years later, there wouldn't be any weeds, and they would all be grassed in. And so it heals itself, but they play a role, especially the deep-rooted ones, bringing up minerals from deep, supplying what the soil doesn't have. And so it's trying to heal us, but you know, we don't like to get healed.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, and so but when we bring in the cover and bring in the carbon, bring in plant diversity and create the ecosystem, a lot of the weed pressure gets less along with that.
Okay.
I do very little weeding.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's it for questions. So thanks again, Jay, for joining us. Everybody says thank you for another informative evening, and we'll see you again next week for our last webinar. Well, thanks again.
Looking forward to next week, and thank you, everyone. So have a good evening.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. Have a good week.
Yep,
bye now.